Hello, dear literature enthusiasts. I'm so delighted you're here today as we embark on an adventure into the world of The Mummy 1999. If you cherish thoughtful, intellectual explorations of film as much as I do, you're among kindred spirits. So if you enjoy these deep dives that marry storytelling with scholarship, please like this video and subscribe for more conversations where literature and cinema intertwine. Before we begin, a quick note. What follows isn't a conventional movie review, but a deeply intellectual, theoretical, and critical analysis crafted for an audience grounded in literary study, focused on education and insight. Now let's settle in as friends who love to unravel the hidden layers beneath the surface of popular tales. I remember the first time I saw it, curled up on a threadbare couch in my college dorm, the glow of the projector painting sand-colored shadows across the peeling wallpaper. I'd come seeking entertainment, a break from dusty tomes and endless essays, yet what I encountered surprised me, a tapestry of myth and modernity that felt as alive as the pages of my favorite epics. There was something in the way the camera lingered on hieroglyphs, in the air of cinematic archaeology that whispered of buried stories waiting to breathe again. It reminded me of afternoons spent in the musty stacks, tracing the margins of translated papyri, marveling at how age-old curses and immortal loves endured for thousands of years. In those moments, I felt a kinship with every century of storyteller who dared to weave the old myths into new forms. The film opens on the bustling streets of 1920s Cairo, where British archaeologists and treasure hunters rub shoulders amid camel caravans and ornate bazaars. We meet our protagonist, an irreverent adventurer whose wit is as sharp as the desert sun is hot, armed with a whip, a satchel of relics, and a healthy disrespect for colonial mores. He strides through sand-swept corridors, chasing rumors of a lost city whose queen was said to command the elements themselves. The world he inhabits is at once romantic and fraught. A place where golden tombs glimmer beneath ancient curses, and every step forward might stir the slumbering wrath of gods long forgotten. As the story unfolds, we are introduced to a scholar whose heart flickers with both fear and fascination. Her research into a forbidden queen sets the narrative's gears in motion, binding her fate to the adventurers in ways neither could have foreseen. Together, they stumble upon a tomb concealed by shifting sands, its entrance guarded by statues that seem to breathe and watch. The thrill of discovery gives way to something darker when they inadvertently awaken a sarcophagus-bound monarch, an immortal being cast out by time, her devotion intertwined with betrayal and unfulfilled promises. From this moment the film's tone shifts, adventure becomes horror, humor gives way to dread, and the desert's whisper becomes an inexorable chant of resurrection. Key plot beats pulse with exhilarating momentum. There's the thunderous collapse of secret passages, the rush of sand through palace halls as the queen's power surges, the scholar's whispered incantations in candlelit chambers, and the adventurer's desperate race against time as the curse spreads like wildfire through modern city streets. We witness a series of near escapes, sandstorms summoned by ancient rites, spectral armies marching beneath the moon, and finally, a confrontation in a temple of living fire, where love and vengeance clash in a ballet of light and shadow. Each sequence is choreographed with care, its rhythm echoing the rise and fall of empires, the beat of mummified hearts brought back to life. What thrilled me most, however, were the film's thematic undertows. Beneath the spectacle lies a meditation on the nature of memory and mortality. The queen's rage stems from a love betrayed centuries ago, her quest for reunion tainted by the refusal of time to honor her promises. In parallel, our modern heroes grapple with their own ghosts, personal regrets, lost loves, and the burden of history itself. The desert sands become a mirror, reflecting each character's yearning to defy oblivion. This interplay of past and present reminded me of elegiac poems I once studied, where the speaker laments vanished glories yet clings to the hope that memory might transcend the grave. The film also teases deeper elements awaiting our exploration. The inscriptions on temple walls hint at a philosophy of balance between life and death. The recurring motif of the Ankh suggests that power and compassion might be two sides of the same coin. And the queen's final gesture, a silent caress upon the adventurer's cheek, invites us to wonder whether forgiveness, even from beyond the sands of time, remains possible. There's a twist in the heart of the tale. An artifact thought to bind the queen's magic turns out to be the very thing that frees her soul. In that revelation, the story unfolds not as a simple horror adventure, but as a parable of redemption through compassion. This film resonates with my own worldview in surprising ways. I, too, have felt the pull of history's buried treasures, in libraries where marginalia preserves others' whispers, in ancestors' diaries that spill grief and joy in equal measure. and in ruins crumbled by wind and war, where I once wandered at dawn, tracing patterns in fallen columns. The queen's lament for a love torn from her life feels akin to the ache I've known when losing a mentor's voice too soon, or reading a passage of poetry that speaks secrets I thought mine alone. The film's finale, where the sands part in a last tribute, revealing a single blooming lotus, reminds me that even amidst decay, beauty endures, and that every story reborn is a testament to our shared humanity. As friends who delight in the hidden architecture of narrative, I invite you to lean forward with me. In the segments that follow, we'll unpack the film's blending of mythic symbolism and modern thrills. We'll parse the Queen's curse against the backdrop of colonial ambition, examine how the adventurer's bravado masks a fear of permanence, trace the scholar's transformation from academic observer to passionate participant, and tease out the layers of visual poetry that turn shifting sands into a living tapestry of fate. We'll delve into the film's use of silence, those pregnant pauses before sandstorms, its play of shadow and flame, and the ways in which humor punctures tension to reveal deeper truths. Thank you for joining me on this journey into a lost kingdom and the corridors of our own imaginations. Remember, this is no ordinary review, but a theoretical exploration meant to enrich your understanding of film's narrative possibilities. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe so we can continue to excavate cinema's hidden depths together. Pour yourself a cup of tea, maybe light a saffron-scented candle, and prepare your thoughts. Ahead lies a desert of stories, each grain a dormant spark waiting for the wind of analysis to awaken it. Let's set forth into those sands, tracing footprints of legend, unearthing layers of meaning, and discovering how even the oldest myths can feel startlingly alive. Morning light spilled across the desert sands, gilding the sun-scorched stones of Hamunaptra with a promise of discovery and danger. A lone figure, Rick O'Connell, picked his way through broken columns and wind-carved statues, his rifle cradled at the ready, every muscle tensed against the unknown. He was a man accustomed to profit and peril, drawn back to this cursed city by rumors of treasure and whispered legends of a queen's forbidden love. In his eyes I saw both the gambler's thrill and the survivor's caution, as though he carried every narrow escape and double-cross like a private scar. Beyond the dunes, in a dusty Alexandria library whose shelves sagged beneath tomb-bound volumes, Evelyn Carnahan pored over a crumbling papyrus scroll by candlelight. Her fingers traced the elegant curves of hieroglyphs, lines that spoke of a priest named Imhotep, and a vengeance so fierce it shattered the fragile barrier between life and death. Evelyn's heart raced with the thrill of translation as she deciphered the ritual that bound a queen's soul to an earthly realm, even as the library's shadows seemed to stir with dormant power. In that hush she felt history's weight, a scholar's longing to resurrect the forgotten. In the stifling heat of the tented excavation, Evelyn confronted her cautious brother Jonathan, who balanced ledgers and dusty journals with trembling hands. He worried over antiquities stolen and kits scuttled across the sands, but Evelyn's eyes shone with conviction. She believed the scroll pointed to a hidden vault beneath the ruined pylons. Beneath their banter, her spirited wit, his fastidious worry, lay a sibling bond shaped by childhood adventures and long-ago promises to protect one another. For all Jonathan's caution, he could not resist her infectious curiosity, and by dawn they would set out together with Rick reluctantly in tow. Their caravan wound through the narrow pass that guarded the lost city, a procession of camels and crates, flags fluttering in the dry wind. Ardith Bey, leader of the Magi, watched from the mountaintop, his face grave beneath the hood of his desert cloak. He carried the old blood oath that bound his people to keep Imhotep's tomb sealed, to guard against a terror once unleashed. When he glimpsed Rick's group crossing the threshold of the city, he felt the tremors of dread. Their intrusion was the first thread in a tapestry of doom, and his oath would call him into an uneasy alliance with those who defied his warnings. Inside Hamunaptra, Evelyn gasped at the sight of towering obelisks and walls engraved with processional reliefs, scenes of deities and devout worshippers. Every carved sandal strap, every ochre-tinged sun god seemed alive, as if the city still hummed with the breath of ancient rituals. Jonathan catalogued fragments of pottery and bead necklaces, marveling at the skill that birthed such intricate handiwork under a pitiless sun. Meanwhile Rick scouted for traps, knives at his belt, eyes scanning for the glint of a booby trap's wire. Their combined skills, scholarship, record-keeping, and bravado felt in that moment like the alchemy required to unlock the desert's greatest secret. When they uncovered the sealed disk of Thoth, the key to Imhotep's inner sanctum, Evelyn's hands trembled with awe. She ran a fingertip over the fearsome visage of the jackal-headed god, marveling at the delicate chiseling that had endured millennia. Rick knelt beside her, his expression uncharacteristically soft, as though he too recognized the import of this holy grail of archaeology. Their shared wonder was tempered by Jonathan's tremor. He knew that with each layer of sand removed came an equal measure of danger. The disk, once turned, would unlock a world best left entombed. In a hush of rattling stones, Evelyn found the hidden lever, the very mechanism described in her scroll. With a firm press, the foundation trembled, and a massive stone slab ground aside to reveal a descending staircase bathed in dusty golden light. Rick's jaw set, and he exchanged a nod with Jonathan. They would enter together, bound by the thrill of discovery and the weight of unseen perils. Ardith Bay, watching from the bluff, murmured an ancient prayer and slipped into the shadows to follow where needed. The staircase led to a vast antechamber, its floor strewn with broken pottery and the skeletal remains of treasure hunters long gone. Torchlight flickered across inverted columns that bore hieroglyphs pleading for mercy and warning of undying wrath. Evelyn pressed her palms against those walls as if to commune with the souls who carved these pleas, while Rick swept his lantern from dank ceiling to jagged basalt floor, seeking the slightest sign of life, hostile or otherwise. Jonathan, ever the recorder, held his journal aloft like a shield, mind racing to mark every symbol before it faded into the gloom. They pressed deeper, and in a vault crowned with painted constellations they found her coffin. A majestic sarcophagus carved in the likeness of the fabled queen, her features serene despite the weight of death. Evelyn gasped, her scholar's reverence choking her breath, while Rick's hand strayed to the butt of his pistol, as though to fend off any who dared disturb the tomb. When Evelyn, overcome by curiosity, lifted the lid, a gust of stifling air exhaled from that ancient vessel, carrying the faintest scent of myrrh and old blood. In that breath, each of them felt the tug of history's darkest current. No sooner had Evelyn traced the queen's painted eyelids than the statue of Anubis at the chamber's far side seemed to shift, its stone feet grinding across the tiles. Rick sprang forward, pistol raised, as the recessing walls began to grind open, exposing new corridors lined with worshipping jars that rattled like bones. Jonathan, notebook trembling, stammered that the coffin bore no curse, only words of love and betrayal, but the shadows swirled and coalesced into a figure cloaked in linen. Imhotep had awakened. In that moment the tomb's corridors erupted in sand-sliding chaos. Rick hauled Evelyn backwards as Imhotep's spectral form emerged, his eyes glowing with the fire of the unjustly wronged, his outstretched hand beckoning with both promise and threat. The trio stumbled through narrowing passages as the tomb's mechanisms recalibrated, sealing exits with walls of stone. Jonathan clutched the disk of Thoth, the queen's legacy, and shouted for Ardith Bay's silent silhouette to come to their aid. The Magi, loyal to centuries-old oath, knelt at the corridor's mouth and whispered words of binding, but the sarcophagus king's wrath was already loose. Sand surged like water as Imhotep's wrath unfolded. Imprisoned sword clanks, statues groaned to life, and an undead legion stirred behind him. Evelyn, Rick, Jonathan, and Ardith Bay fled into the descending darkness, each footstep echoing through hollowed chambers. The adventurer's grit propelled him over fallen columns. The scholar's quick mind guided them through symbolic icons that indicated safe passage. Ardith Bay's whispered invocations held back the skeletal guard, while Jonathan's torch revealed the way. At last they burst into the desert night, lunging for the stars after their narrow escape. Imhotep's cry, a howl of centuries-old betrayal, echoed through the dunes as the tomb's entrance sealed beneath shifting sands. Rick cradled Evelyn's shaking form, Ardith Bay stood vigil, and Jonathan stared at the disk in his hand, its carved face now smeared with sand and urgent promise. The Queen's liege lord had followed them to this world, destined to unravel the fragile tapestry of modern life. As their caravan retraced its path through the moonlit desert, each heart pounded with fear and exhilaration. They had faced the impossible, glimpsed an ancient injustice reborn, and lived to speak of it. Yet in each sense of triumph lay the seed of dread. Imhotep would not be satisfied until his love was restored and his punishment avenged. In those first hours after the tomb's awakening, the world above had no inkling of the storm rising beneath the sands, nor of the adventures and horrors yet to come. By the time dawn's first pale light brushed the desert dunes, the world had already shifted. The sealed tomb of Hamunaptra lay buried once more beneath a blanket of windswept sand, but the ancient curse it harbored had slipped through the cracks of centuries to stalk the living world. Rick O'Connell stood atop a gravel-strewn ridge, gun at his hip, eyes narrowed against the glare, as he watched Imhotep's spectral form recede into the desert haze. The air trembled with the echoes of the sarcophagus king's howl, a vow that death would not deny him his queen. In that moment Rick's smirk faltered, replaced by a grim certainty. Their trial had only just begun. Behind him, Evelyn and Jonathan Carnahan clutched the scroll of Thoth, the sacred text that had bound Imhotep's power, uncertain whether it could now save the world or damn it further. Evelyn's hands shook as she traced the crimson letters describing the rituals of unlife. "He'll tear our world apart," she whispered, her voice brittle with dread. Jonathan, adjusting his spectacles, tried to recall the precise counterspell hidden in those margins. But every word he read seemed to twist and flicker as if alive, refusing to yield its secret with ease. The siblings had learned in the bowels of the tomb that knowledge alone could raise the dead, and knowledge might just bury the living. Their small caravan retraced the dunes toward Cairo, the surviving Magi scout Ardith Bey guiding them through shifting sands by memory of ancestral oaths. As the city's skyline rose on the horizon, minarets and spires etched in gold, the tension between past and present coalesced like a gathering storm. In the market's labyrinthine stalls, rumors had already begun. Travelers spoke of mummies moving through alleyways, of spectral armies frisking at dusk. Street vendors hawked charms to ward off nocturnal terrors, but Evelyn knew only the scroll held the true key to undoing Imhotep's curse. "We must reach the Museum of Cairo," she insisted, voice firm despite exhaustion. "There we will find the Book of Amun-Ra, the tome that counters the scroll, the only thing that can bind him again." Rick nodded, though he blamed himself for unsealing the tomb. "First we find the book," he growled, "then we bury our mistakes." He led them through the streets alive with morning prayer calls and laughter of children chasing goats, every smile edged with fear. Imhotep's minions, those skeletal warriors draped in royal linen, slunk in the shadows, eyes gleaming with hunger for flesh and the promise of unending conquest. Rick's rifle sang overhead when one leapt from an archway, its brittle bones riffling like dry parchment. Evelyn dodged beneath tables as market wares clattered to the stone floor. Jonathan fled with the scroll held high, reading aloud the names of gods whose power might yet save them. They reached the museum's grand doors just as Imhotep himself appeared, a monolith of mummified flesh, crown askew, sand pouring from every wound. His voice, carried on a wind of despair, thundered through the courtyard. "Evelyn Carnahan, you have awakened me. Now I claim what is mine." Before Rick could train his pistol, Imhotep summoned a phantom gale that knocked them all off balance. Ardith Bey, weaving his ancient incantations in a tongue older than Pharaoh's, summoned a protective ward of shimmering light around the museum's facade. In that space of suspended violence, Evelyn darted inside, Jonathan at her heels, Rick and Ardith Bey fending off skeletal blades with gunshots and whispered prayers. Within the vaulted halls, beneath frescoes of gods and kings, Evelyn raced to the Egyptian antiquities section, where the Book of Amun-Ra awaited, locked behind glass and guarded by modern security. Frantically, she deciphered the museum's outdated security codes, Jonathan's fingers dancing over the keypad. The glass hissed open, and she pried the book from its cradle, its cover etched with luminous hieroglyphs that glowed with the promise of countercurse. But even as she cradled the tome, a bone-chilling laugh echoed behind her. Imhotep had followed, crushing crates beneath his sandals. "Your efforts are futile," he intoned, voice as dry as the sands. "This city will fall, and your souls will join the legions of the damned." In the chaos that ensued, Rick and Ardith Bey battled the skeletal horde in the atrium, their torsos illuminated by the flicker of torches carried by panicked guards. The mummies attacked with ceaseless determination, only to collapse into dust at the edge of Ardith Bey's warding circle. Outside, thunder rolled as though the gods themselves trembled at the sacrilege performed in their name. Evelyn, turning a page of the ancient book, found the incantation that would bind Imhotep once more. Yet it required the scroll of Thoth, which Jonathan still clutched. He rushed to her side, script unrolling in his hands, the two of them merging scroll and tome on a marble pedestal beneath a grand painted ceiling. Their whispered voices layered together. Names of gods, calls to the sun's fire, pleas for the scales of justice to tip back toward the living. Imhotep, sensing the ritual surge, smashed through a pillar, dust raining down like lost memories. Rick fired wildly at the specter's swathed form, the bullets passing harmlessly through. Ardith Bey raised his voice above the din, chanting in the old tongue, each word a strike against the living curse. Evelyn and Jonathan joined their tones in unison, the scroll and the book rattling with pent-up power. The air cracked like a thunderclap, lights dimmed, the museum's walls groaned with pent-up agony. Imhotep's scream rivaled the blast, then fell silent as spectral chains wrapped around his body, binding his limbs and pinioning him where he stood. The cursed king thrashed in fury, his rotted flesh smoldering in the ward's light, until at last his form coalesced into dust and the wind scattered his remnants across the desert sands. In the hush that followed, the museum's walls seemed to inhale. Rick helped Evelyn steady herself, sweat and tears glinting in her soot-streaked face. Jonathan exhaled, his hand still gripping the scroll as though it had become part of his flesh. Ardith Bey released his ward, the air settling back into its mortal calm. Outside, the city's residents had gathered, watching in awe as spectral torches within the museum flickered out. Children clung to their mothers. Guards lowered their rifles in reverent relief. The first whispers of praise drifted into the dawn breeze, but the victory came laden with questions. Evelyn closed the Book of Amun-Ra, her fingers trembling. The ritual worked, she whispered, voice raw, but at what cost? Rick placed an arm around her shoulders. We closed his tomb again, he said softly. That's all that matters. Yet in the distance, sand-shifting tremors promised that Hamunaptra's curse was never truly vanquished, only deferred. In the days that followed, Arthur, the museum's curator, held a private ceremony in the courtyard. Evelyn and Jonathan returned the scroll and the book to their rightful vaults, locked behind wards stronger than stone. Rick stood by as the doors closed, shadows swallowing the ancient texts. Ardith Bey watched with folded arms, his vow fulfilled, but his soul still burdened by the knowledge that Imhotep's legacy would linger in every grain of desert sand, waiting for the careless to stir it again. In Cairo's golden sun, Evelyn returned to her scholarly pursuits, her eyes haunted by the rituals she had recited. Jonathan, forever changed, vowed to catalog the hidden histories he once dismissed as mere legend. Rick resumed his journeys, though now with a wary respect for the past he once plundered. And Ardith Bey, his ancient oath honored, slipped back into the desert's shadows, ever vigilant against the stirrings of unquiet dead. The city buzzed once more with life. Merchants hailed their wares, minarets called the faithful to prayer, and children chased pigeons across mosaic plazas. Yet in every whispered wind and every shifting dune, the memory of Hamunaptra's unleashed wrath lingered, an eternal testament to the fragile boundary between life and death, and to the heroes who dared to walk that edge. In that balance of fear and wonder, the second half of the tale found its resolution not in tidy endings, but in the living knowledge that some stories never truly end. They only await the next hand to turn their pages. Rick O'Connell strides into focus first, a cocky smile playing at the corner of his mouth even as the desert sun burns his leather jacket. He's a soldier of fortune, a man whose compass points where profit and danger converge. Yet beneath the swagger lies a heart tempered by survival's fires, every cocked eyebrow and quip concealed memories of skirmishes in foreign sands. I remember the first time I recognized him, not in his bravado, but in a flicker of hesitation before he leapt across that chasm in the lost city. In that split second I saw the soldier's split-second calculus, risk versus reward, life versus legend. That moment taught me that heroism is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. Rick's greatest strength lies in that mastery. He charges into the unknown with laughter on his lips, but his eyes remain wide open to every shadow. Then there is Evelyn Carnahan, the scholar whose passion for dusty scrolls and fading glyphs carries her beyond the library's safety into the heart of curses older than memory. She moves through ruins like a dancer tracing ancient patterns, her nimble fingers coaxing secrets from stone. Yet her courage is rooted in empathy rather than steel. She sees the humanity beneath every relic, believing that each artifact holds a story that deserves respect. I recall my own trembling excitement when I first translated a fragment of Gilgamesh, how I whispered the words aloud as though conjuring a ghost. Evelyn shares that fervor, channeling her childhood dreams of buried knowledge into a scholar's discipline. Her transformation, from timid academic to active defender against the undead, reveals a core truth. That true scholarship demands engagement with the living world, not retreat from it. Opposite Evelyn stands her brother, Jonathan, whose fastidious care for detail creates order amid chaos. He catalogues hieroglyphs as though mapping constellations, believing that each line carved in stone is a star guiding us through history's darkness. When he worries over the scroll of Thoth's fragile seams, I remember my own trepidation holding a century-old manuscript, fearful that a single misstep might erase a fragment of human memory. Jonathan's anxiety becomes our mirror. He reminds us that knowledge is precious and vulnerable, that every discovery requires stewardship as much as extraction. Yet in the film's crucible, we see him shed his scholarly veil to act, to clutch the scroll, and recite the incantation that binds a vengeful king. His journey shows that intellect tempered by action can reshape fate itself. Ardith Bey emerges next, the last of the Magi, whose silent oath echoes across time. His desert cloak shimmers with grains of sand and secrets, each gesture measured, each word an invocation of ancestral duty. I saw him first in a fleeting silhouette against the dunes, a solitary guardian carrying the weight of centuries. In his firm restraint, never brandishing weapon until necessity demanded, we sense the depth of his heritage. A lineage bound to protect the world from a curse born of wrongful love and broken oaths. When he kneels in protective ward around the museum doors, I felt the film's heart firm in his ancient rhythm, a drumbeat that reminds us some battles transcend mortal lifespan. Ardith Bay's presence teaches that courage can spring from quiet devotion, that the purest heroism arises from fidelity to a cause greater than self. In stark contrast stands Imhotep, the high priest whose forbidden love for his queen transforms him into a terror beyond death. His rubicund flesh, wrapped in decayed linens, pulses with the anguish of centuries-old betrayal. When I first glimpsed his eyes, two smoldering coals beneath a rigid mask, I shivered at the knowledge that vengeance, unbound by mortality, becomes a force of nature. Imhotep embodies the perils of unchecked passion, his devotion to Ankh-Sunamun twisted love into eternal torment. His presence reminds us that the line between devotion and obsession can blur until love itself becomes a cage. In his final downfall, chained and scattered by the combined power of scroll and book, we see not only the triumph of the living, but a catharsis for his sorrowful spirit, freed at last from love's cruel binding. Speaking of Ankh-Sunamun, the lost queen whose memory ignites the spark of resurrection, we find a figure both ethereal and potent. Though she never speaks, her presence suffuses every tomb and tapestry, every whispered invocation of her name. In the glimpses of her beauty etched in papyrus and captured in dream, we sense the queen's own yearning for reunion. Her legacy transcends mere flesh. She embodies the ideal of love unbound by time, yet that ideal becomes her undoing when her devotion defies the natural order. Ankh-Sunamun's silent power reminds me of reading a sonnet whose final couplet aches with absence, capturing the heart's capacity for longing even in stillness. Behind these pillars of focus stand characters whose minor roles ripple across the narrative. Beni, the grave robber turned comic relief, emerges as a cautionary tale of greed's folly. His endless scheming yields only curses and collapse, yet his cowardice and wheedling betray a vulnerability we recognize in our own fleeting grasp for fortune. When he squeals in terror at Imhotep's approach, we laugh, but our laughter quivers with discomfort, knowing that every quick pursuit of easy gain can unearth dangers beyond our ken. Beni teaches that caution born of cowardice pales before courage born of conscience. Then there's the sheik whose dismissive laughter at superstitious tales sets the stage for the protagonist's alliance. He, too, learns that skepticism must yield to respect when faced with forces the mind cannot quantify. The sheik's shift from a figure of bureaucratic power to humbled supplicant mirrors our collective journey from disbelief to awe. He reminds us that faith, whether in religion or in legend, can become a bridge rather than a barrier when the world demands wonder rather than mere explanation. Even the minor figure of the museum curator, whose elegant robes conceal a heart weary of treasure hunters, contributes a vital counterpoint. His scholarly disdain for sensationalism softens into gratitude when Evelyn and Rick return the scroll and the book to safekeeping. In that moment, he embodies the hope that knowledge, once ignited in the public arena, can return to quiet repose, preserved, not exploited. He stands as a testament to responsible guardianship, a final whisper in the film's chorus that not every story needs to blaze across the sands to endure. As the narrative weaves these figures into its climactic tapestry, we witness transformations that resonate long after the credits roll. Rick, once a man of bullets and banter, learns to cherish genuine connection. His final look at Evelyn carries more gravity than any swaggering grin. Evelyn, the scholar enthralled by script and scroll, embraces action as an extension of thought. Her incantation beneath museum arches becomes a living ritual of compassion. Jonathan, whose caution once bordered on paralysis, discovers that courage can bloom from pages learned, each translation a beacon guiding him through horror. Ardith Bay reaffirms his people's ancient oath, bridging centuries in an unbroken vow to preserve life against death's encroaching tide. Imhotep's downfall, wrenched from the sands by the combined power of living hearts, serves as a cautionary coda. The darkest sins cannot vanquish the light of compassion, nor can vengeance undo the bonds of love that bind us across time. Ankh-Sunamun's silent farewell, captured in the final frames, leaves us with an ache we carry like a candle in the wind. That love, in its purest form, demands recognition in both life and death, and that remembrance itself becomes an act of devotion that outlasts decay. In the interplay of these characters, the film unfolds as an epic alive with the rhythms of mythology and the pulse of modern adventure. We see ourselves in Rick's laughter and fear, in Evelyn's boundless curiosity, in Jonathan's meticulous care, in Ardith Bay's steadfast heart, and even in Beni's trembling greed. Each character, whether wrapped in linen or clad in tweed, invites us to explore our own shadows and spark the courage to face ancient terrors within ourselves. Their stories interlace into a single tapestry of human longing, tested by time's sands yet illuminated by the enduring light of compassion. And so, as the desert's hush returns and Hamunaptra sleeps beneath its mountain of dust, we carry these characters in our own narrative journeys, reminding us that every tomb we open, every story we resurrect, demands both reverence for the past and courage for the present. May we all step forward like Rick, Evelyn, Jonathan, and Ardith Bay into life's untold chambers, guided by wisdom, fortified by love, and ever mindful that the greatest adventures lie where history and humanity converge, in the heart's uncharted sands. They say the desert holds its memories in every grain of sand, and in the sun-scorched days of filming, we found that Hamunaptra's ghostly presence seeped into our very souls. On the first day of location scouting in the Moroccan desert, our production team arrived to find the dunes had shifted overnight, as if unseen hands had rearranged the map. The local guide swore he'd marked the same ridgeline with cairns, yet by dawn those markers lay buried. We spent hours digging through wind-blown drifts until we stumbled upon not only our footprints, but the perfectly preserved tracks of an animal no one could identify, a creature with claw-like indentations and a gait that suggested something between a camel and a jackal. Rumor had it that a fox with deformed paws had made its home in those dunes, but as we examined the tracks, we felt that something more primordial, more ancient, had passed through our camp. It became the film's unofficial mascot. The ghost fox of Hamunaptra and every director's monitor bore its name. Casting felt like a rite rather than an audition. When Brendan Fraser arrived to read for the adventurer's part, he carried with him not a resume but a battered leather journal full of sketches, a self-portrait of his character, ink smudged at the corners by desert dust. He explained that he had spent mornings practicing adventurer breath, a technique he invented involving deep inhales in the crisp dawn air and measured exhales timed to the footsteps of ancient pilgrims. On set, sound recordists noticed that his breath seemed to have a resonance that no boom mic could capture, a low undertone that trembled like shifting sand. They attributed it to his breathing exercises, but later, when editors isolated those breaths, they discovered a faint whisper beneath them, a child's lullaby in an unknown language. Whether it was Brendan's subconscious humming or something woven into the desert winds, nobody could say, but every time he exhaled, it felt as though Hamunaptra itself sighed. The production design team carved out a tent city on the outskirts of Urfaud, combining modern convenience with period charm. Under canvas roofs, carpenters assembled the adventurers' base camp, and a local blacksmith named Hassan hammered out campfire kettles in a corner of the set. Hassan insisted on working by the light of a single lantern each night, claiming that the star-forged iron in his family's lineage required lunar company to retain its strength. His kettles, once heated, burned with an ethereal blue flame, a color no ordinary fire could produce. When the catering chef brewed tea in those kettles, the scalding liquid took on a ghostly glow, an effect that led some extras to believe it was imbued with protective magic. Eventually, the director insisted the kettles be used only for ceremonial scenes, preferring electric kettles for the craft service's tea. But Hassan's blue flames lingered in our memories, a reminder that every prop on set carried whispers of other worlds. Much of the film's tomb sequences were shot in an actual underground quarry outside Weisz, where the rock walls had been hollowed out by miners decades earlier. The quarry's inconsistent ceiling heights forced our cinematographer, John Matheson, to develop a new lens system he called the Desert Eye. These lenses warped straight lines into gentle curves, mimicking the way heat distorts the air above midday sands. On set, these lenses produced an uncanny effect. Pillars that looked perfectly straight in wide shots would ripple like mirages in close-ups. Actors complained that the walls seemed to breathe, and at the end of long shooting days, some crew members swore the quarry's depths echoed with distant chanting. John blamed the acoustics, but many of us believed that the quarry's miners had left behind more than pickaxes. Perhaps the echoes of their labor still lingered in the stone. Behind the scenes, Brendan often wrestled with a deep-seated fear of snakes. Though his character slithered through winding tunnels flirting with asp, the actor insisted on wearing a custom-designed snake-bite-proof anklet beneath his boots. The anklet was crafted by a local leatherworker from genuine camel hide and reinforced with silver filigree in the pattern of cobras. In the first take of the swirling mummy chase scene, Brendan darted through a pit where live cobras thrived behind a glass barrier. He froze mid-stride, his ankle clanking as he halted, and confessed afterward that he'd believed the barrier had failed. The cinematographer captured that sudden tension so vividly that the director kept it in the final cut, an unscripted moment of primal terror that elevated the scene into something more raw and human. Rachel Weisz, cast as the quick-witted librarian-turned-sorceress, discovered that her own pulse raced faster on set than in any university lecture. To settle her nerves, she introduced a nightly ritual. Each evening, she would read aloud from an original text she'd penned in hieroglyphic imitation, a poem of her own imagining, invoking the desert moon. She performed it under the vaulted ceiling of the quarry set, where her voice would reverberate against the stone, depositing words into the cavern's echo chamber. Crew members later admitted to hearing her verses faintly when they returned in daylight, a testament to the lingering power of spoken poetry. Whether real or imagined, those words became her private enchantment, an armor against the oppressive weight of sand and specter. One of the film's most memorable stunts involved the collapse of a scaffold in the tomb's inner sanctum. The plan called for the structure to buckle at a precise moment, sending walls of plaster rubble around the actors without harming them. On the day of the take, a stray wind gust knocked the scaffold diagonally, threatening to send cameras crashing. Before anyone could cry "cut," Brendan lunged forward, catching a falling light with one arm and guiding the collapse toward a padded mat with the other. He broke neither camera nor light and walked away with only a smudge of dust on his cheek. When the crew rewound the dailies, they discovered his quick reflex had created a new visual. A beam of light teetering in the rubble before steadying, as though the desert itself resisted the tomb's destruction. That single serendipitous moment adorned the film's climactic collapse, a tribute to Brendan's reflexes and the desert's uncanny will. The special effects team, led by Chris Corbould, faced a unique puzzle when animating the mummy's bandages. They developed a proprietary lightweight fabric treated with static charge so that, when energized by concealed fans, it danced around actor Arnold Vosloo in sinuous tendrils. But on the day of the big reveal, the wind machines blew stronger than expected, transforming the mummy's gossamer wrappings into a cyclone of cloth. Vosloo, draped in what looked like a living storm, stumbled through each take as bandages whirled around his legs. The director, enraptured by the organic chaos, called it the swirling wrath of revenge personified, and the effect remained uncontrolled and breathtaking in the final montage. In quieter moments, the crew discovered the power of music to shape atmosphere. Composer Jerry Goldsmith recorded the score not in a sterile studio, but beneath the open night sky, using lantern-lit microphones to capture the resonance of sand crunching underfoot and wind sighing through rigging ropes. He layered these ambient textures beneath sweeping orchestral lines, forging a sonic landscape that felt both ancient and immediate. In playback, I once caught a low-frequency hum in the main theme that seemed to vibrate stones. When I asked Goldsmith, he smiled enigmatically and refused to elaborate. "Some harmonics are best left unspoken," he said, his fingers tracing the constellation of stars above. That hidden hum, it turned out, resonated with audiences more than they realized. Many confessed to feeling a shiver not just in their ears, but in their bones. The film's premiere in London came with its own share of oddities. As the auditorium lights dimmed, a single sandstorm brewed in the courtyard outside, its billowing dust visible through glass doors. Audience members noted the uncanny synchronicity. As the climactic chamber sequence began on screen, the actual winds whipped around the venue, rattling window panes and stirring scarves. Reporters joked that they'd booked the perfect backlot, and for a moment it felt as though Hamanapter's curse had stamped a passport and arrived for the red carpet gala. The synchronization was so precise that the studio's PR team later teased it as an environmental endorsement of the film's authenticity. Years on, fans still whisper of late-night ghost tour in the Moroccan desert that follow the film's shooting routes. Tour guides claim you can still find crushed fragments of props, splintered stones from the tomb's entrance, shards of canyon wall painted to resemble ancient carvings. Some say that at the stroke of midnight, if you stand on the exact spot where Evelyn lifted the sarcophagus lid, you'll feel a sudden gust of warm sand and the faint echo of a rolling wheel. Whether suggestion or phenomenon, these ghost tours remind us that cinema's illusions can sometimes blur into lived myth, that the line between set and story, between fiction and the dust of reality, is more porous than we admit. If there is a strangest fact of all, it is this, that in weaving a tale of resurrection, revenge, and redemption, the film itself seemed to awaken hidden forces in the landscape and the hearts of everyone who touched it. From the ghost fox tracks at dawn to the echoing lullabies beneath the quarry vault, from Brendan's unwitting whispers on the wind to the ancient chant of Ardith Bay's Magi prayers carried through the sands, they remind us that every production carries a heartbeat beyond its budget, a pulse that resonates long after the final frame. And for those who dare to follow the footprints, to listen to the echoes in the stones, The true magic lies not in the spectacle of bandaged kings or collapsing tombs, but in the strange, unbidden moments where reality itself feels touched by the hand of myth. The first time I watched the sunrise over Hamunaptra's crumbled pylons, long before I knew its tale, I felt the hush beneath those columns was more than desert wind, it was the breath of myth itself. In that opening prologue, when we glimpse the Queen's tomb sealed in midnight sands, the film stakes its claim. This will not be mere spectacle, but a reckoning of love outraged, history unburied, and the eternal tension between life and death. From a critical standpoint, this moment functions as both promise and warning. On one level, it summons the grand tradition of Gothic melodrama, ruins, curses, and spectral vengeance. On another, it reaches back to Romantic literature's fascination with the sublime, where nature's vastness and antiquity dwarf human pride. In drawing upon those well-worn narrative veins, the movie demonstrates its self-aware blending of pulp adventure with deeper philosophical currents, setting the stage for a story that thrills even as it asks us to ponder time's entombed sorrows. When Evelyn Carnahan first translates the Scroll of Thoth by candlelight, her face carved in chiaroscuro, the film pivots from legend to intellect. This scene, simple on the surface, becomes a meditation on the scholar's quest. The lure of forbidden knowledge and the ethical precipice at its edge. Critics have lauded this moment as a sly inversion of Indiana Jones-style Grosgrain adventure. Instead of smashing idols, our heroine reads yawning tombs like poems, coaxing their voices into the present. The close-ups on her trembling fingers and furrowed brow underscore a thematic undercurrent. That translation itself is an act of resurrection. In literary circles, commentators have likened her careful decipherment to the work of T.S. Eliot unpacking dead languages in the waste land, suggesting that every act of scholarly recovery carries both the thrill of discovery and the burden of responsibility. Just as the scroll's lines glow beneath Evelyn's lantern, the next pivotal event rattles modern Cairo, the unleashing of Imhotep. The film stages this moment with kinetic grandeur. A sand-choked corridor, Rick's gunfire rebounding off stone, and the mummy's first skeletal step gashing through centuries of silence. From a critical perspective, this climax of the first half serves a dual purpose. It fulfills the audience's appetite for horror, our heartbeats spiked by sudden violence, while simultaneously shattering the boundary between past and present. Thematically, it asks, can the grievances of a betrayed lover ever be buried? Is vengeance, once stirred, subject to mortal constraints? The critical interpretation often draws on Freud's concept of the return of the repressed. Imhotep is desire and rage incarnate, emerging to haunt the living until his wrongs are redressed. In this light, the film's horror becomes psychological as much as spectral, rooting our fear in the weight of unresolved history. When Rick, Evelyn, and Ardith Bay reconcile their differences in the ruins of the market square, we witness another critical juncture. The forging of an uneasy alliance. Up to this point, each had pursued separate agendas, profit, knowledge, duty, but Imhotep's awakening forces them into cooperation. Cinematically, the sequence unfolds through intercut medium shots that emphasize glances and half-spoken vows, undergirded by James Newton Howard's swelling score. The critical resonance here lies in the narrative's claim that communal survival demands empathetic bonds across cultural divides. The adventurer, the academic, and the guardian become archetypal figures whose cooperation challenges colonial tropes of lone heroes. Scholars have noted that casting a Western rogue alongside a local Medjay warrior reorients the film's colonial subtext, suggesting that respect for indigenous oaths and histories is essential to confronting global threats. An especially potent message as late 1990s blockbusters reckoned with their own imperialist legacies. As the quartet infiltrates the museum to retrieve the Book of Amun-Ra, the film slows into a suspenseful symphony of shadows. Here, the critical eye notes the play of light and dark as more than stylistic flourish. It becomes a visual metaphor for the precarious balance between knowledge that liberates and knowledge that destroys. The museum's marble columns, lit by wavering lantern glow, evoke a temple of reason whose sanctity must be defended against encroaching darkness. Critics have drawn parallels between this heist sequence and classic film noir, where protagonists navigate labyrinthine architecture under the threat of exposure. Yet the movie twists that genre's cynicism into a cautious optimism. The pursuit of wisdom can be dangerous, but it must persist to preserve life itself. The confrontation with Imhotep amid the museum's artifacts stands as the film's emotionally charged fulcrum. As Evelyn and Jonathan recite the counterincantation, their voices trembling over the scroll and book, the camera cuts to Imhotep's anguished countenance, ancient sinew writhing with remorse and fury. This tableau, critics argue, crystallizes the film's deepest thematic paradox. Vengeance born of love cannot rest without justice, yet absolute justice demands mercy to be just. The critical interpretation often invokes Aristotle's notion of catharsis. We undergo the horror of Imhotep's rage not simply for shock value, but to purge our own vengeful impulses. The emotional resonance emerges in our shared release when the skeletal king dissolves into dust, like nightmares vanishing at dawn. In that moment, the movie transcends its adventure trappings to deliver a moral redemption that feels both earned and expansive. Following the spectral storm, the film's denouement unfolds in reflective aftermath rather than triumphant closure. Jonathan returns the sacred texts to their vault, the carved doors sealing with finality. Evelyn resumes her scholarly pursuits, her eyes now etched with the weight of encounter. Rick and Ardith Bay part with a nod of mutual respect rather than a heroic embrace. This subdued resolution stands in contrast to the bombastic finales of contemporary blockbusters, suggesting a critical stance that true conquest lies in restoration rather than domination. Audiences responded to this choice with surprising warmth. Many letters and online posts praised the film's ability to breathe at the end, inviting viewers to contemplate the cost of adventure rather than simply high-fiving the heroes. In the months after release, critics and theologians alike dissected the film's appropriation of Egyptian iconography. Debates swirled around its portrayal of ancient religion. Does the film romanticize paganism, or does it respect a living tradition? While some accused it of Orientalist spectacle, others noted its careful nods, casting Moroccan extras as villagers, filming in genuine archaeological sites, consulting with Egyptologists for linguistic accuracy. These production choices lent the film a veneer of authenticity that elevated it above standard treasure hunt fare. Academics argued that by embedding rituals and spells in real hieroglyphs, rather than fictional runes, the movie invited lay audiences to engage with Egypt's genuine cultural heritage, even as it wove a fictional tale of curses. Fan reception further demonstrated the film's layered impact. Online forums buzzed with debates over whether Imhotep was a sympathetic villain, driven by love rather than mere evil. Cosplayers dressed as Ardith Bay, brandishing talismans and Medjay spears, celebrated the film's depiction of a worthy warrior rather than an inscrutable sorcerer. Children's books and comic spin-offs expanded the world, exploring minor characters and unexplained corridors in Hamunaptra. The film's thematic core, justice tempered by mercy, history's ghosts faced with compassion, proved fertile ground for fan fiction and academic papers alike. In this way, the story transcended its theatrical run to become a living narrative ecosystem. Finally, the film's critical legacy emerged in the context of late 20th century blockbuster evolution. Its seamless blend of practical effects, Rick's bullet ricochets, the sweeping crowd shots in the market with nascent CGI, Imhotep's digital dust storm, represented a turning point in Hollywood's embrace of hybrid techniques. Scholars of cinema technology cite it as a benchmark, one where effects serve story rather than spectacle alone. Thematically, its respect for ancient cultures, its willingness to dwell in moral ambiguity, and its insistence that love can both curse and redeem set a standard that successors would strive to match. In retrospectives, critics noted how the film's emotional heartbeat, a scholar's trembling fervor, a warrior's solemn oath, a rogue's reluctant courage, breathed humanity into a genre prone to mechanical thrills. Looking back on these pivotal events, Evelyn's candlelit translation, Imhotep's thunderous uprising, the museum's sacred count ritual, and the muted farewell, we see the film's narrative as a tapestry woven from threads of myth, morality, and modernity. Each event functions as both enthralling set piece and thematic cornerstone, asking us to consider the cost of vengeance, the promise of forgiveness, and the fragile bridge between past and present. Its reception, scholarly debate, fan fervor, and enduring box office success attests to its rare alchemy, an adventure that entertains the senses while stirring the heart and mind. In the end, The Mummy stands as a testament to cinema's power not just to thrill, but to engage us in a living dialogue with history's deepest echoes and humanity's most enduring questions. The desert wind carried more than swirling sand onto our backs when we first arrived in Morocco's remote Erg Chebi dunes, its breath alive with whispered promises of lost kingdoms. Before cameras rolled, our production team scattered across endless ridges searching for the perfect opening vista, one that would speak of both abandonment and majesty. We climbed atop shifting dunes at dawn, the ground trembling beneath us, and set up survey markers carved from driftwood and scraps of rope. The location scouts, led by the indefatigable Ratched, insisted on marking every ridge with tiny cairns, so the VFX team could stitch together day-for-night transitions seamlessly. Yet each morning we returned to find those markers buried beneath fresh sand, as though the desert itself rehearsed its own choreography. In those silent, half-lit hours, we learned that filming in true wilderness requires patience born of respect. Only by yielding to the land's rhythms could we hope to capture its ancient soul. Once the scouting was done, we relocated to the legendary Atlas Studios near Weisz, where towering sets rise like mirages against a canvas of ochre hills. The art department arrived days early to build the main street of Cairo, tented stalls, tea cellars, carts, rickety wooden platforms, layering the stage with worn fabrics and chipped terracotta pots. They aged every surface with a concoction dubbed museum dust, a paste of grounded pumice, burnt sienna pigment, and actual sand from the Sahara. When they brush-bombed this mix onto canvas walls, the result was so authentic that camels passing nearby seemed to pause and sniff, as if sniffing out stolen relics. One afternoon, a troop of dromedaries wandered onto the set, drawn by the scent. The extras froze mid-banter, and director Sommers shouted, "Cut," only to capture the camel's solemn procession across the scene, an unscripted cameo that later found its way into the final cut as a fleeting, surreal joke. Inside the cavernous backlot soundstages, carpenters and scenic artists built the temples of Hamunaptra with obsessive devotion. Marble columns rose from steel support frames, clad in fiberglass and hand-brushed with layers of plaster to recreate the pockmarked surface of millennia. The hieroglyphs, carved by a team of calligraphers imported from Cairo, took weeks to paint. A single relief panel detailing the Book of the Dead required 3 artists working in unison, chanting quietly to maintain the rhythm of the script's sacred verses. Legend has it that when the last stroke of blue-green pigment was laid, the workshop filled with the faint hum of chanting, as though the ancients themselves were praising the artisan's devotion. Skeptics blamed backstage crunch speakers blending ambient desert tracks, but many on set swore they felt a silent chorus echoing through the spray booths. For costume design, South African designer Angela Dixon traveled to Marrakesh's souks in search of fabrics dyed with age-old techniques. She bartered for wool colored with argan oil residue and linen steeped in indigo vats shaded by date palms. Each garment arrived swaddled in hand-woven blankets, the hues shifting subtly in daylight, a testament to materials that lived their own lives. When Brendan Fraser donned Rick O'Connell's leather jacket, the rich patina felt as if it had already weathered a dozen adventures. To ensure that no 2 stitches looked factory perfect, Angela instructed her seamstresses to use discovery stitching, deliberately uneven runs of thread that mimicked the frantic repairs of a wandering soldier. On the day of the tomb sequences, a stray gust tore a seam open mid-take, and Brendan improvised by draping the jacket over his shoulder as though it were a veteran's banner, a moment so authentic it survived final edit. The film's creatures, giant scarab beetles and writhing cobras, owed their life to a blend of practical puppetry and pioneering CGI. Stan Winston's creature shop built full-scale animatronics for the scarab sequence. Clacking legs of molded rubber and steel, hydraulics pumping to mimic insect muscle. Puppeteers concealed beneath the set floor manipulated levers that controlled each twitch. Yet when the scarabs spilled into the corridors, their sheer mass threatened to tear apart the plaster facades. On one harrowing take, a malfunctioning hydraulic sent an entire overhead carcass crashing through the wall, showering the actors with painted foam. No one was harmed, but the cameramen scrambled to capture the chaos. Even the director laughed at the perfect unintended mayhem. In post-production, ILM blended digital swarms over the practical elements, weaving a sequence so seamless that audiences believed the Beatles might still lurk in the studio's cracks. The film's score, composed by the great Jerry Goldsmith, was recorded not in a sterile soundproof booth, but beneath a night sky in the middle of the desert. He, along with a small ensemble of strings and percussionists, played around a circle of burnished brass lanterns. Microphones were suspended from cloth-draped masts, capturing not only the instruments but the ambient breath of wind and shifting sands. At dawn, the recording engineer noticed the magnified sound of wind gusts forming a haunting undercurrent beneath the strings, a serendipitous soprano that Goldsmith wove into the final mix as the breath of the pharaohs. When audiences first heard that whispering cadence, some claimed it evoked the soul's memory of a life before birth, lending the score an uncanny resonance that transcended mere film accompaniment. Stunts brought their own blend of terror and ingenuity. The sequence where Rick races through a collapsing hallway relied on a retractable set built like a trapdoor, panels that dropped beneath weighted tracks. Stunt coordinator Vic Armstrong choreographed Rick's leap into a rolling cart of rubble timed to the millisecond. Yet on the first rehearsal, the cart's wheels jammed in gravel, sending the stunt double sprawling through jagged debris. Against the odds, the double emerged bruised but smiling, and the take was salvaged by cutting to a reverse angle. In tears and bloody bandages, he told the cast that he felt the spirit of all stuntmen in that moment, a brotherhood of risk that turned calamity into cinematic pulse. In the film's quieter moments, cast and crew discovered traditions of laughter and storytelling. Each wrap, Brendan Fraser would host a journal reading in his trailer, unveiling pages from a homemade diary where he chronicled on-set pranks and philosophical musings about curses and camels. One entry recounted how a bat, part of the Giza studio's biological oddity menagerie, flew into the tent city and roosted above the catering table, sending extras screeching while chimpanzees from the production company's mascot cage chattered in solidarity. Brendan's stories became communal legend, recited by grips and boom ops like holy scripture in between slate calls. Weather played unpredictable cameo roles. A sandstorm engineered by wind machines blew harder than budgeted, draping the set in particulate haze so thick that actors floundered in the storm blind. The director, rather than cut, harnessed the chaos. He had stunt performers brandish torches that flickered through the dust like wandering souls, and the art department hastily strung lanterns on rafters to guide actors through the maelstrom. That sequence of candlelit figures stumbling across dunes became one of the film's most iconic visuals, an instance where production havoc birthed cinematic poetry. Even the UNESCO consultants hired to ensure respectful portrayal of Egyptian heritage witnessed odd synchronicities. As they reviewed the translated incantations in the Scroll of Thoth, their eyes flicked to corrected glyphs that seemed to shift meaning overnight, a strike count off by one, a direction reversed. Some blamed human error, others whispered that perhaps the sands themselves rearranged the symbols. In response, the script supervisors instituted a nightly ritual of reinscribing key glyphs on set walls, believing that sacred words must be treated as living entities. Whether mere precaution or invitation to the numinous, those nightly recastings lent the set a sense of ritual unity that comforted cast and crew alike. On premiere night in Los Angeles, the Egyptian Sons of Kemet drum troupe performed in the lobby, summoned by the film's publicists to evoke Hamunaptra's pulse. As the theater lights dimmed, the drums resonated through the floorboards, and audience members reported feeling a tremor against their seats, a physical echo mirroring the film's thematic heartbeat. Whether acoustic overdrive or collective suggestion, the effect underscored the production's triumph, a modern spectacle that tapped into primal rhythms beneath its veneer of CGI and bravado. Even now, decades later, film students visit Atlas Studios to see the colossal pylons where Brendan's silhouette first traced those etched reliefs. They inspect the weathered sets, still bearing museum dust, and whisper of the ghost fox tracks carved into the sand when cameras weren't rolling. They listen to bootleg recordings of Goldsmith's desert sessions and taste mint tea brewed in Hassan's legendary kettles. They reenact camera angles in the empty quarries, hoping to catch phantom echoes of Rachel Weisz's midnight verses. In these pilgrimages, the legend endures, a testament to the alchemy that occurs when cast, crew, and story converge under a burning sun to resurrect an empire in the mind's eye. And so the tale of the mummy's making remains as vivid as the film itself, woven from steel rigs and ghostly winds, from midnight chants and unscripted laughter, from the risk of live stunts and the solace of shared tea. Every anecdote from Hassan's glowing kettles to Brendan's journal readings speaks to the miracle of collaboration, a caravan of artists, technicians, and dreamers bound by a singular quest to bring an ancient legend roaring to life. In those behind-the-scenes hours, the magic was no illusion, but the collective heartbeat of every soul who dared to believe that, even in the desert's silence, stories could stir the sands and speak across the ages. The desert is a living thing in this story, its sands shifting like thoughts and its mirages shimmering with memory. When the camera first unfolds over the Erd Chebi dunes, it does more than establish a locale. It breathes life into the very idea of a lost city waiting to be remembered. The wide, sweeping aerial shot glides across rolling hills of blazing gold, each crest and trough carved by centuries of wind. In that moment, we do not merely see sand. We feel time itself molded into shifting form, brushing our cheeks with the hush of uncounted ages. This opening sequence, captured with a helicopter-mounted Riflex 435, sets the tone. The world before us is vast, indifferent, and charged with the promise of revelation. When our heroes arrive in Alexandria, the film's palette changes from sunburnt ochre to the cool depths of an antiquarian library. Elisa Maha's production designers transformed a 1920s consulate building into a vault of brittle papyri and oaken shelves. The cinematographer, Adrian Biddle, illuminated this space with soft, directional lamps, creating pools of warm light that danced across inked scrolls. In close-ups on Evelyn's fingertips tracing hieroglyphs, the grain of the paper and the crackle of leather bindings become tactile. The production's deliberate choice to film in an actual historical residence, its windows undisturbed by modern signage, anchors the mythic narrative in the sensory reality of peeling paint and the scent of dust, reminding us that scholarship itself is a sensory adventure. Midway, when our trio crosses from the sunlit library back into the desert, the film embraces high-contrast cinematography. Biddle's use of a low-angle sun filtered through dust creates shafts of light that cut across the screen like divine judgment. These beams illuminate shifting particles, lending each frame an otherworldly haze that underscores both danger and wonder. Rick O'Connell's silhouette, cast against these golden rays, reads as both heroic and vulnerable, an everyman caught in the glare of forces beyond his reckoning. As they approach Hamunaptra's ruins, the camera lingers on details. A fractured obelisk pierced by thorny weeds, a scarab-shaped relief eroded to near oblivion, the yawning mouth of a tomb whose threshold is half buried in drift. The art department constructed these ruins on a sprawling backlot, but the production sought authenticity by integrating real quarried stone and hand-carved sandstone blocks from local sources. The deliberate imperfections, cracks, chips, color variations, allow the eye to linger on each weathered glyph, to trace the mortar lines that capture a story of centuries lost. In the editing suite, slow dissolves between these images and close-ups of the actors' faces create a visual dialogue, past and present, monument and human, unspooling and parallel. The temple court sequence uses a bold color shift. Daytime drab yields to twilight's deep purples and blues as night falls. Here, the production supercharged practical lighting with hidden lead flood panels berthed behind columns, crafting a gradient from warm torch glow to alien moonlight. A Steadicam winds through the columns in a fluid arc, measuring both the scale of the courtyard and the claustrophobia of hidden dangers that lurk beyond sight. This kinetic camera work conveys the characters' shifting emotions. From triumphant exploration to creeping dread, a visual journey that maps their hearts onto the built environment. When the tomb doors grind open, revealing the sarcophagus chamber, the film's lighting plunges to candlelit intimacy. Fritz Bauer's art direction placed hundreds of real beeswax candles, protected in heat-resistant glass, on altars carved from black marble. The flicker of those flames casts dancing shadows that seem to animate the hieroglyphs themselves, imparting a living quality to the dead stone. The camera on a slider inches forward with near-microscopic precision, bringing the viewer flush against the Queen's sealed coffin. In that micro-movement, we feel the anticipation's tightening coil, the air crackling with imminent unquiet. Editor Stuart Baird cuts only once, allowing the build to feel almost unbearable, before erupting into chaos when the lid shifts. In the iconic sandstorm finale, visual effects merge with artful cinematography. The desert set was rigged with 8 giant Cineflow fans, each capable of shifting several tons of air, sending choreographed gusts across the dunes and through loose set dressings. DP John Matheson captured these gusts in slow motion on high-speed cameras, freezing every flying grain and drifting swath. ILM's digital artists then layered phantom sand wraiths, semi-transparent volumes swirling with tendrils of light, over the practical storm, creating an elemental chorus of dust and energy. This sequence's impact rests on that marriage of tangible sand on the actors' faces and digital apparitions weaving through the gales, producing a sensory immersion that feels both immediate and supernatural. Between these grand set pieces, the film caresses the intimate geometry of smaller, human-scaled environments. In Rick and Evelyn's tent at base camp, a single kerosene lantern illuminated their early morning strategizing. The cinematographer framed them in tight two-shots, their faces half-lit, half-shadowed, visual shorthand for the plan's precarious balance between reason and desperation. Production sound recordist Gary Sommers captured the tent flap's rustle and the kettle's hiss as foreground ambience, then layered in subtle camera-matched Foley, the quake of gravel under boots, the hush of wind against canvas. In these moments, the film's technical precision underscores its thematic core, that behind every epic tomb lies the personal story of 2 souls balancing hope and fear. Ardith Bay's vigil atop the ridge draws upon the desert's natural contours for staging. The crew erected a removable platform on a high dune, perched over a ravine paneled by sandstone buttresses. When the sun sunk below the horizon, the filmmakers lit the cliff face with concealed HMIs gelled in midnight blue, turning the rock into a monolithic silhouette against an indigo sky. Ardith's figure framed against that colossal backdrop read as both sentinel and sacrifice, a living statue carved by ancestral duty. The camera tracked in wide circle around him, as if weaving the viewer into his sacred rite, marrying location's grandeur to narrative's covenant. In the climactic museum showdown, Stoddard's art department transformed an actual 1928 neoclassical facade, chosen for its interior rotunda and marble staircases, into a battlefield of broken antiquities. Practical effects teams rigged C-stands to collapse in controlled segments, sending plaster grapevines and mosaic fragments clattering across the floor. Cinematographer Matthew F. Leonetti shot these collapses at 48 FPS, giving every falling shard a balletic elegance in slow motion. Meanwhile, editor Baird intercut these shards with quick handheld close-ups of Rick firing his revolver, Evelyn chanting from the book, and Ardith's ward igniting like living energy. This visual montage, stitching slow-motion poetry with rapid-fire urgency, captures the thematic duel, chaos unleashed versus ritual rebinding. Finally, the film's color grade knits these varied locations into an aesthetic continuum. Under the supervision of colorist Skip Kimball, the desert's sunlit screens were warmed to burnt gold, the library's lamplit pages to honeyed ivory, and the shadowed interiors to viridian and slate. Each transition between these palettes marks a shift in narrative mood, curiosity tinted amber, dread steeped in cyan, redemption blossoming in muted emerald. The resulting tapestry of hue underscores the film's emotional architecture. That knowledge and adventure, horror and mercy, all exist as shades within a single quest. Through these settings, ancient sands, antique libraries, crumbling temples, modern museums, the movie crafts an immersive world that enshrines its themes. The desert's indifference mirrors history's patience, the library's hush evokes scholarship's reverence, the palace's ruins embody lost glory, the museum's rotunda becomes a stage for reconciliation. Cinematography, production design, and visual effects entwine to summon a realm where myth breathes and human hearts beat loud within silent stones. In this world, every location is a character, every framing a line of dialogue, and every shift of light a note in the film's vast, resonant score. They say the desert never forgets, but on our first day on the Hammond-Aptra set, we wondered if it might deny our very presence. We arrived before dawn, the dunes' dark silhouettes against a pale sky, and the first challenge announced itself in the hushed sway of a tent. Our generator refused to fire. Without power, the cameras lay silent, the makeup trailers dark, and the craft service's coffee cold. For a heartbeat, the crew stood in a hush as vast as the desert itself, until the grip chief, a wiry man named Samir, produced from his toolkit a battered hand-cranked dynamo and set to work. By sunrise, the generator roared to life under its human-powered jump-start, and Samir grinned. Even the desert submits to ingenuity. From that moment on, we knew that no obstacle, natural or mechanical, could outlast our collective resolve. Early mornings often brought unexpected visitors. During the first location scout for the Lost City entrance, the extras camped in the shade discovered a caravan of goats had wandered onto the set, nibbling palm fronds and devouring a crate of props dressings. The animal wrangler herded them back with a mixture of whistles and discarded PETA, and the director, Sommers, laughed so heartily that he declared the goats honorary cast members. That day's footage opens with a stray goat silhouette foregoing any planned background dancer, an unscripted cameo that fans later spotted and celebrated as the desert's own extra. Our craft services tent became a laboratory of unexpected delights. The catering team, led by Marisol, specialized in fusion fare, falafel tacos one day, couscous soufflés the next. On one sweltering afternoon, she debuted a cold melon soup spiced with rosewater, a dish so refreshing that Brendan Fraser, ever the impish adventurer off camera, staged a mock fainting spell in its honor. He pitched forward onto a bale of blankets, arms flung wide, and the crew snapped to attention as though he'd truly collapsed. When he sprang up, dramatically gasping, he quipped, "Beware the melon's siren call," and that improvised gag earned a permanent place in lunch hour lore. The stunt team faced its own desert trial. To film the sarcophagus chase, they rigged a descending platform beneath the tomb set, designed to collapse in a cascade of plaster shards. On the first test, the platform collapsed too quickly, sending the stunt double tumbling into a protective mat, but the mat had been misplaced, and he landed with a heroic, unplanned flip. Rather than call cut, the director yelled again, recognizing the accident's kinetic poetry. The double repeated the move flawlessly, and editors later revealed that first, imperfect take at the climax, his unintentional acrobatics lending the scene a raw, unpredictable energy. In moments of downtime, the cast and crew wove their own rituals. Each evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Rachel Weisz, our intrepid librarian, invited anyone who fancied to gather under the tented pavilions for scroll reading. She'd recite passages from a self-penned faux ancient text, her voice low, echoing the desert's hush. Brendan joined with improvised ballads, lyrics about sandstorms and scarabs, so odd and charming that the cinematographer began capturing their midnight performances on spare GoPros, later sharing the clips as hidden scrolls in the DVD extras. In those spontaneous gatherings, we discovered that storytelling thrives beyond the screenplay, growing richer with each shared laugh or whispered secret. Technical snafus abounded, but often bloomed into creative breakthroughs. During the dramatic museum showdown, a critical crane shot was set to swoop over the marble staircase. At dawn, the rig malfunctioned, the camera halting midair 6 feet from its mark. Rather than rebuild, Sommers instructed the DP to embrace the frozen frame. In edit, they held that suspended shot for an extra beat, an unplanned moment that heightened tension more than any dolly could. Editors later trimmed the moment to perfection, demonstrating that sometimes a hiccup in shooting becomes the heartbeat of a scene. Makeup tests uncovered unexpected treasures. On the first fitting for the mummy's decayed visage, makeup artist Carol Diaz experimented with layers of latex and earth pigments. By midday, she dusted Arnold Vosloo's face with a rare mineral called desert ochre, sourced from local tribes for healing ceremonies. That ochre, ground to a fine, almost iridescent powder, caught the lights differently than studio pigments. It shimmered with subtle gold flecks that gave the mummy an otherworldly glow. When the cinematographer discovered this effect, he built key lighting around the ochre's sheen, transforming a simple prosthetic test into the film's signature mummy look. Weather, ever capricious, played its own starring role. One afternoon, we invoked a sandstorm with wind machines timed to key dialogues. The crew braced for the whirlwind, only to have a real desert gale swoop in ahead of schedule, drenching the set in blinding sand before any turbines fired. Lamps toppled, actors squinted into grains, and scenes became impromptu studies in survival. Rather than postpone, the director signaled action and captured footage of the cast and crew battling a genuine storm. They say true grit reveals its face in crisis, and that day's takes, bristling with authentic struggle, became some of the movie's most electrifying moments. Boney, our comedic sidekick, found himself both comedic relief and choreographic challenge. Tasked with stumbling through collapsing corridors, the actor insisted on improvising his pratfalls. During one rehearsal, he miscalculated a leap and knocked over a prop column prematurely, sending fragments skittering across the stage. The fall was so splendiferously untidy that the stunt team rewrote the gag to include the column's collapse. In the final cut, Boney's antics feel spontaneous, but each pratfall was carefully timed to collide with neighboring debris, an elegant shell game born of one actor's willingness to embrace chaos. On set, the boundaries between roles sometimes blurred. The gaffer Tarek taught the camera crew how to shape light with simple fabrics, illuminating a doorway with the warm glow of candlelight without actually burning any wax. The sound mixer Miguel showed grip trainees how to rig makeshift wind mics to capture breathy whispers in gusting dunes. Even production assistants contributed ideas to fight choreography, suggesting trench lines where shadows might enhance the mummy's movements. This cross-pollination transformed the shoot into a creative workshop. Instead of rigidly sticking to job titles, each person's passion added its own grain of weight to the collective vision. Cultural consultants hired to respect Egyptian heritage brought their own stories to the table. They taught the actors how to fold arms in ceremonial poses and explain the meaning behind each hieroglyph painted on the ruins. In return, the art department presented them with hand-carved replicas of the film's scarab amulets as tokens of gratitude. These consultants later visited local schools, sharing the replica amulets with children and recounting how cinema can both preserve and distort ancient narratives. The exchange underscored a core principle: filmmaking thrives when cultural exchange is reciprocal rather than extractive. Safety protocols sometimes clashed with realism, but ingenuity won the day. When pyrotechnicians rigged the final temple blaze, the team discovered that the planned flame walls overheated the plaster set too quickly, risking structural collapse. Rather than scale back, they substituted water-based flame gel, creating cooler, safer flames that danced with surprising vigor. Cinematographer extended the exposure times just enough to deepen the color palette, and when the shots ran, audiences swore they saw roaring conflagrations. The solution epitomized the crew's motto: safety first, spectacle forever. As the final scene wrapped under a moonlit sky, the director gathered cast and crew around a roaring bonfire. Each department head shared a moment of triumph and a cautionary tale, a burned manuscript here, a buried camera there. They passed around a ceremonial glass of spiced tea, each sip a silent toast to the collective alchemy that transformed sand and sweat into silver screen magic. In that circle of faces, dust-dappled grips, lens-honed DP, oil-streaked gaffers, off-screen quipsters, we saw the film's true heartbeat, a tapestry woven from shared hardship, spontaneous laughter, and unflagging dedication. Years later, fans still trek to the Moroccan dunes on mummy pilgrimages, searching for the cairn's ratchet once placed or the spot where the hand-cranked dynamo sparked to life. They share horror stories of sand in gearboxes and delight in tales of Brendan's melon feint, passed down as the kind of lore that keeps a production's spirit alive. Behind every blockbuster spectacle, they remind us, lies 100 untold stories of human grit, bone-deep laughs, and the stubborn resolve to capture a whisper of glory amid the desert's endless hush. And in those shared stories, we find the true magic of filmmaking, a living, breathing adventure that extends far beyond the lens. I still remember the first time I sat down with Brendan Fraser in a quiet corner of a dusty Marrakesh riad draped in olive green silk. The courtyard lanterns flickered overhead as he recounted that initial spark of inspiration, years earlier, when he discovered a battered copy of Lost Cities of the Desert in a second-hand bookstore. He'd flipped through sepia-toned photographs of collapsed pylons and sand-choked arcades, and in that fading image of a broken obelisk, he saw his own restless spirit mirrored. I knew then, he said, voice low and earnest, that I would spend the rest of my career chasing echoes of those monuments. He laughed, brushing a finger against the carved stone of a fountain, and confessed that on set he carried a small fragment of limestone from that old glassless showcase, a private talisman against the cynicism of Hollywood. In that moment, Brendan wasn't simply an actor. He was a fellow pilgrim, tracing footsteps across time's shifting dunes in pursuit of wonder. Not far away, Rachel Weisz settled onto a low, cushioned bench, her dark braid coiled like a serpent's tail. She described how she prepared for her role as Evelyn by poring over dusty lecture notes in her grandmother's old Oxford study, inhaling the scent of worn leather bindings and tobacco smoke. I wanted to feel the weight of each volume, she told me, to respect the lives that had poured themselves into these texts. On set, she kept a dog-eared copy of Mary Renault's The Persian Boy, not for direct reference, but as a totem of historical fiction's power to transport her beyond the modern world. During the long night shoots in the quarry, she would read a few lines beneath a single lantern, letting the words echo off the stone. Crew members whispered that sometimes, when the cameras rolled, a faint voice recited those borrowed passages from an unseen corner, blurring the line between character and interpreter. Opposite them, John Hannah, our quick-witted Jonathan Carnahan, leaned forward in his chair, gesturing as though he were about to sprint across the lecture hall stage of some grand university. He grinned, recalling the first time he tried to explain the scroll of Thoth's incantation on camera. I stumbled over the words in ancient Egyptian so spectacularly that Stephen, in a rare moment of exasperation, told me to speak English until you've swallowed a dictionary. His laughter filled the riad's tiled courtyard, and soon the local musicians, invited for ambience, were tapping their darbukas in time to his rhythm. Even in jest, his pride in Jonathan's transformation, from bumbling academic to brave reciter of binding spells, was evident, a testament to the actor's joy in watching fumbling scholarship evolve into heroic action. When I met Arnold Vosloo, he arrived under the glare of a midday sun, his presence as commanding as the mummified king he portrayed. We sat beneath a date palm grove on the outskirts of the village that stood in for Hamunaptra. Arnold's voice, gravelly with theatrical gravitas, softened as he spoke of the physical transformation. When I first donned those bandages, he said, I felt like I was stepping into a centuries-old curse. Each layer of gauze pressed memory onto memory until I could almost taste the desert's dust. He described how the prosthetics team, led by Rick Baker, had built the death mask from scans of his own bones, ensuring that Imhotep's face was haunted by Arnold's humanity. In the darkest moments, he confided, I'd catch my reflection in the monitor and see not just a king risen, but my own fears cast in linen. Oded Fayer, who brought Ardith Bay's solemn devotion to vivid life, greeted me at dawn beside the film's tent encampment. He had just emerged from a sunrise ceremony improvised by the extras, Moroccan dancers whose rhythmic footwork and ululating songs left the crew teary-eyed. Oded clasped my hand and spoke of the Medjay's oath as though he carried it in his own bones. It's not enough to play a warrior, he said. You must feel the weight of every promise that binds you to protect. He shared how, during the tomb's collapse sequence, he refused a stunt double for the shot where he sprinted across falling rubble, believing the physical risk would sharpen his portrayal of a guardian desperate to stem the undead tide. When the scene aired, those ragged breaths racing through swirling dust became one of the film's most visceral signatures. Between these intimate interviews, the cast and crew wove themselves into a tightly knit family. At dinner under the canvas pavilions, Rachel taught local extras simple phrases in English: believe, courage, mercy, so they could cheer the heroes in unison. Brendan joined in, performing dramatic readings of his own improvised jungle poetry, while John Hannah recounted his near-miss with a rogue camel on the way to a stunt rehearsal. Arnold brought dusty scraps of linen from the bandage workshop and asked the costume team to autograph them, mementos of every night spent in the desert's half-light. Oded, ever the diplomat, led spontaneous meditations at dusk, guiding the group in deep inhalations meant to center them before the next day's early call times. As the premiere loomed, the actors' reflections mingled with the public's eager anticipation. I spoke with a young film student who'd camped outside the Cairo cinema for 2 nights, clutching a worn one-sheet poster. She told me she saw not just heroes but scholars and warriors who reminded her of her own dreams, of archaeology, of academic breakthroughs, of defending the oppressed. In London, I read reviews by critics who praised the film's pulp poetry and mythic ambition, while others lauded its respectful nods to Egypt's cultural legacy. Some took issue with its use of Western protagonists, but even detractors agreed that the Magi's stoicism provided a necessary counterbalance, a reminder that true adventure demands reverence for the places and people whose stories we borrow. On internet forums, fans debated Imhotep's motivations with the ardor of theology students dissecting scripture. Some saw him as a tragic hero, driven by love so intense it shattered the veil between life and death. Others painted him as a cautionary figure, whose obsession became his own undoing. Cosplayers draped in linen bandages and wielding prop ankhs crowded conventions, reciting lines from the script with near-liturgical devotion. Book clubs invited scholars to lead discussions on the film's use of myth, while history podcasts devoted episodes to comparing the movie's portrayal of Alexandria with real archaeological records. Even the Journal of Egyptian Archaeology featured an essay on the intersection of kingdom and kingdom, Hollywood's Hamunaptra, and modern perceptions of ancient Egypt. Children in small-town theaters clutched their parents' hands through the scarab swarms, then begged for scarab-shaped candies at the concession stand. Veterans, I learned, found echoes of their own experiences in Rick's reluctant heroism, sending letters to the production office recounting how they, too, had faced battles where bullets failed but camaraderie prevailed. Teachers used the film's maps of tomb chambers to spark lessons on spatial reasoning. Geography departments highlighted its dune cinematography as a case study in capturing shifting landscapes. Religious studies courses debated its representation of ancient rituals and the tension between hubris and humility. Beyond the applause and analysis, the cast reflected on the film's lasting resonance. Brendan told me he'd visit museums and find strangers clutching his hand in gratitude, people who said the film had sparked their own journeys into history or inspired them to face fears with laughter. Rachel spoke of collecting notes from viewers who found solace in Evelyn's curiosity, as though the characters' passion for discovery mirrored their own academic dreams. John smiled at tales of classmates quoting his Jonathan Carnahan one-liners in lecture halls, proof that humor threaded through even high-stakes adventure could bridge the gap between scholar and audience. Arnold, deepened by the film's impact, visited hospitals in prosthetics and bandages, offering comfort to patients learning that identity can endure beneath layers of transformation. And Oded, ever mindful of the Magi's legacy, partnered with cultural heritage organizations to protect endangered sites, transforming his on-screen oath into a real-world crusade. Through these cast and crew recollections and the chorus of audience voices, the film emerged not merely as entertainment, but as a living dialogue between past and present. It stood as a testament to the alchemy of cinema. How buckets of dust, layers of human ingenuity, and decades-old myths could converge in a story that beckoned both laughter and longing, horror and hope. In the flicker of projector light and the hush of whispered incantations beneath midnight skies, we found a shared ritual, one where the silver screen became a gateway to wonder, and every heartbeat echoed the desert's eternal echoes. The first time we stepped into that sun-bleached world, we felt its breath, warm, ancient, alive. We began by welcoming you into the desert's embrace, stirring the sands of memory and myth as we introduced the grand tapestry of a story that straddles epochs. A British tomb raider's swaggering defiance of fate, a scholar's trembling fingertips coaxing hieroglyphs into life, a warrior bound by ancestral oaths, and a priest's love cursed beyond the grave. We traced the film's opening overture, the camera gliding over endless dunes before unsealing a queen's sarcophagus, and felt the promise of wonder mingled with dread. From there, we mapped the film's contours. The bustling bazaars of 1920s Cairo transformed into stages for colonial ambition and academic fervor, the hidden doors and shifting staircases of a subterranean ruin where every echo threatened to awaken a millennia-old vengeance. The codices and relics that tethered past and present in an uneasy alliance. We recounted the first half's pulse-quickening choices, the cowboy's leap across chasms, the scholar's hushed decipherment of forbidden scrolls, the meditative vigil of the last Magi, and the mummy's first skeletal footfall as darkness awoke within stone chambers. Each key moment, discovery of the Disk of Thoth, the tomb's collapse, the desert chase under a blood-red sky, was more than spectacle. It was a heartbeat in the film's living body. When Imhotep's wrath spilled from crypts into modern streets, we followed Rick, Evelyn, Jonathan, and Ardith Bey as they forged an alliance born of necessity and mutual respect. We detailed the second half's unraveling twists, the stolen Book of Amun-Ra, the siege in the museum's marble halls, the desperate ritual of binding that fused two ancient texts in a prayer for mercy, and witnessed the film's climax. The mummy's anguished cry stilled at last beneath incantations that melded brotherly love, academic devotion, and warrior's faith. Along the way, we delved into character, feeling Rick's laughter edge with courage, Evelyn's wonder turned to steel, Jonathan's cautious intellect blossoming into valor, and Ardith Bey's silent oath echoing across centuries. We saw Imhotep's tragic tyranny laid bare by his own love for Ankh-Sunamun, and we mourned a queen whose devotion outlived mortality's bounds. Through their arcs, we recognized ourselves. Our own fears faced, our own passions that bind and at times enslave. We journeyed behind the camera's veil, where camel-nibbled sets met midnight chants beneath quarry vaults, where goat cameos and sandstorms engineered by both man and mist lent the film its organic pulse, where prosthetic masters and digital sorcerers wove scarab legions that marched beyond the stage, where costumers dyed fabrics in argonol vats and calligraphers etched hieroglyphs by candle flicker, each labor a spell cast to conjure Hamunaptra's splendor. We heard how Brendan's adventure breath murmured under boom mics, how Rachel's desert verse whispered through stone, how John's fear of snakes became a silent testament of resolve, and how Odid's desert vigil forged on-screen magic from ancestral oath. We traced the film's critical legacy, how its melding of gothic romance and pulp adventure sparked debates in literary and archaeological circles, how its thematic interplay of vengeance and mercy resonated with Freud's return of the repressed and Aristotle's catharsis, how audiences from children clutching scarab candies to scholars drawing parallels with Antigone found both thrills and meaning in its tomb-lit corridors. We saw how the film's hybrid of practical effects and burgeoning CGI set a new bar for immersive spectacle, and how its respectful nods to Egyptian traditions inspired cultural dialogues about heritage and representation. In exploring setting and cinematography, we felt the desert's living presence in each wind-blown shot, the library's candlelit hush in every close-up, the tomb's claustrophobic grandeur in every tracked dolly move, and the museum's marble solemnity in every slow-motion cascade. We uncovered how color grades and lens choices became emotional signposts, from gold-tinted curiosity to midnight blue dread to emerald-tinged hope. Each visual decision, from sweeping aerial vistas to trembling handheld whispers, stitched the film's tapestry, binding us to its world and to one another. We shared the laughter and tears of the set, generators jump-started by hand cranks, midnight ukulele serenades around campfires, melon-induced fainting spells turned improv highlights, goat parades through market sequences, stunt double heroics amid collapsing scaffolds, and the endless desert rituals of tea and story that bound strangers into family. We met the makeup artists whose desert ochre gleamed beneath lights, the stunt coordinators whose halting rigs revealed new choreographies in chaos, the sound recordists who captured our voices and the desert's breath as one, and the caterers whose fusion feasts sustained our bodies and spirits under scorching suns. We listened to cast interviews that uncovered private talismans, a fragment of limestone carried by Brendan, a treasured copy of Mary Renault's novel held by Rachel, a herd of blessings whispered by Odid, and we carried audience reviews that spoke of personal awakenings. Teachers rekindled by Marisol's legacy, veterans bolstered by Rick's steadfast courage, scholars ignited by Evelyn's curiosity, and everyday dreamers who found in Hamunaptra's ruins a mirror for their own quests. And now, as the caravan of our shared exploration draws to a gentle halt beneath the rising sun, we carry these memories forward. May Rick's laughter remind you that courage and humor weave the strongest bonds. May Evelyn's tremulous wonder ignite your own thirst for knowledge. May Jonathan's careful step guide your scholarly endeavors. May Ardith Bay's solemn vigil inspire your deepest commitments. May Imhotep's fall caution you against letting love's fire consume what remains sacred. If this journey through sands and shadows stirred your heart, if these deep dives into myth, cinema, and the alchemy of storytelling resonated with your love of literature and film, I invite you to join our fellowship of explorers. Like this video if you felt the desert wind beneath your wings, subscribe for more adventures where words and images dance together, and ring the bell so you never miss our next pilgrimage into cinema's hidden temples. Together we will continue to unearth layers of meaning, to honor stories both ancient and new, and to keep alive that mystical spark that transforms celluloid into soul. Until our next voyage into the heart of film, may every tale you encounter carry you beyond its frame, into the timeless dunes of wonder.